Hi, everyone, and welcome to another Good Governance Academy event. As usual, we are opening early for everybody to join, and I'm going to record us, open up the YouTube live stream. For those of you who don't know, all of our events are recorded and are live streamed to YouTube, and the recordings are available on YouTube. So please go and look at past events on our channel. Really quite useful. What we also do is we, from our events, we use a very neat tool called Google Notebook. And Google Notebook provides frequently asked questions for us and a podcast style summary. And now more recently, really useful, is a 7-minute overview or extract, which is really very useful. So we do include that on the registration page. So registration page doesn't go away, doesn't disappear when we've had a webinar. The page is there and it is available for you to go and refer back to. And going forward, hopefully towards the end of this year, beginning of next year, we are going to have the opportunity to continue discussions like the discussion we have today. And today, I'm very excited to invite Andrea to come and talk to us about her new book. But just to mention, and this is not the first time we've had Andrea with us. Andrea spoke with us at our 10th colloquium on generative AI in 2023. So we've been speaking about this for quite a while, but Andrea just had we just got a few words from Andrea in that colloquium. So I'm going to put it in the chat function for you to go and have a look and look at the video and the podcast from that. All of the reactions and emojis are open today. If you like what Andrea is saying, please give us a thumbs up and give us a clap, give us some feedback. Please let us know where you're from in the chat function. Let us know from around the world where you are joining us from today. And if you have any questions, they might get lost in the chat. I will try and pick them up. But if you have any questions for Andrea, please put them in the Q&A. And then for those of you who are seeing the questions on the Q&A, please can you uptick them for me so that we ask the ones right at the top that most people are interested in. So lovely having everyone here today and really lovely having Andrea here today. And I'm going to start off by asking Andrea to please tell us a little bit about her book. I know it's a sneak preview. In fact, it's a sneak preview. But who goes about writing a book? And this is not your first, Andrea. Tell us a little bit about it, please.
Oh, thank you so much, Carolyn, and really great to be here, back with you, chatting about my next book, which, as you say, is a sneak preview because it won't be out till very early next year. But we are in the stages of production and everything is moving along nicely. So really appreciate this invitation and appreciate everyone around the world starting to tune in here. So let me give you a little background. I think it always helps to put context around why somebody does something. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit about my background and how it's fed into my writing a few books in the last decade or so. So my background, I grew up in Europe, Spain and Germany, came to the US when I was in my late teens. And I've always had a passion for governance and democracy. Those are the two themes of most importance to me. My mother grew up in Nazi Germany. I grew up in Franco Spain. And then I was really interested in how democracy gets built. And I wrote my PhD. I did a PhD in political science on Spain's transition to democracy. And it was the beginning of a big movement around the world, as we all know, of new democracies emerging in the 80s and the 90s, even the early 2000s. Now we find ourselves in a slightly different era, I think, where there's a lot of threats to democracy and to governance in general. But getting back to my background, I became a lawyer on Wall Street first, so that was an interesting experience for me for a while. And then I became a general counsel to a couple of different companies, and I expanded my portfolio to do things that I was much more passionate about, which was certainly governance or corporate secretarial work, risk, crisis, the whole corporate responsibility, sustainability space. Ethics and compliance was a huge part of what I did for the companies that I worked for. I worked for 4 companies over 18 years as a senior executive. And then I started my own business about a dozen years ago, doing what I did on the inside that I had a real passion for, which was the governance, sustainability, ethics and compliance, and providing strategic risk and opportunity advice to companies and boards and some nonprofits as well, and government agencies. So that's what I've been doing for the last dozen years. And my sort of through line is that I think it all begins and ends with good or bad leadership. And governance is a hugely important part of this. And I know I'm speaking to the Good Governance Academy audience and to you, Carolyn, who devote yourselves to this. So I'm sure this resonates. And so my thing is, if board members don't get it and don't do the right thing, and if boards don't understand what's happening, and the context, the situational awareness of what's going on around the world as it impacts them, if they're not doing those things, they're not serving their shareholders or their other stakeholders. So to me, that's kind of the through line of everything that I've done. So I spent a lot, I love to write. I was sharing with Carolyn earlier that the reason I write so much is because that's how I learned. So by giving myself a challenge, I then sort of go into these things and start understanding them better. And then I love to share what I've learned with others. So that's kind of my personal view on why I write. So my first book was my Spain's Transition to Democracy PhD dissertation. It was converted into a book. And then I wrote a few books in the last decade on reputation risk, on AI, believe it or not, back in 2017, 2018, because the new technologies and cybersecurity, which was another area that I was in charge of in my last company, and I've continued to work in the cyber governance and cyber resilience building space. Those topics to me became more and more important in the last decade, as they have to all of us. And so I've spent a lot of time engaged with companies, with think tanks, and with others about these issues. And in 2020, I published a book called Gloom to Boom: How Leaders Transform Risk into Resilience and Value. And in that book, it was published by Routledge. In that book, I developed the concept of ESG plus T for technology. And so I went through the whole book, sort of examining each category. And then the technology piece was new to the concept of ESG at the time. And I kind of approached it in the same way that I approached the environmental, the social, and the governance, which was to look at the issues, the risks, the opportunities, and then help, board members and others think about how do we get our arms around this. These are interconnected issues. They're important issues to our businesses, to our shareholders, to our stakeholders. So that book came out, and that was a very helpful sort of next step for me. But I continue to write a lot of articles. So I'm always writing. I'm writing for various different publications, Diplomatic Courier, NACD Directorship, the WEF, World Economic Forum Agenda. So I've written a lot, and I'm constantly gravitating to two important themes. One is, how does new technology, and especially exponential technology, factor into everything we do? And it's now just explosive. So hence the Pandora, which we'll talk about in a minute, the use of the word Pandora. And the other set of themes that I'm really interested in, goes back to my political science background, I guess, is megatrends. So I've written a lot about megatrends, and it's incorporated into both Gloom to Boom and my new book. I always set the stage with what's going on around us. And I have 5 megatrends. One of them is technology oriented. And I like to start with that, and I'll share a few of those ideas in a moment. But so both the megatrends and the technology became a topic that I was writing about a lot. So lo and behold, I wrote a piece for Directorship Magazine, NACD, back in the summer of 2023, 2 years ago. And the article was Governing of Exponential Technology, something like that. And a prior publisher of mine, who's become a friend, who was at a different publisher when she published a book of mine back in 2017, she just, cold emailed me and said, would you like to write a book about exponential governance of exponential technologies? And I said, hell no. Because writing a book is a painful process, but ultimately a really great endeavor. So long story short, she's with Georgetown University Press. It's the most prestigious press that I've dealt with so far, and really a joy to work with them. And we're very much at the end of the whole thing, which is really great, except for marketing and, you know, all that other good stuff. And so it's been a very rigorous process. I've had peer reviewers. I've had friends who are science-based people who have looked at it. So I feel like I got a lot of great feedback in the process to make sure I wasn't going to, you know, mess anything up, because I'm not a technologist, in case people are wondering. I'm not a mathematician. I don't have those kinds of, you know, brain cells, so to speak. What I have is sort of the systems thinking, the, you know, thinking about society, politics, technology as it intersects with governance. So what I'm trying to bring to this book is, how do we govern these, not just new technologies, but exponential technologies, generative AI being one of the most salient and the most influential, clearly, but there's a bunch of others, and I talk about that in my book. So this is all by way of getting to the point of, why did I write this book? And again, I wrote it partly because I'm always trying to learn how to do these things. I want us to be prepared for what's next. And I also want us to think about our stakeholders all the time, because we're not doing that. And I think we've entered a period now that is quite dangerous in world history. There's a lot going on. I haven't even mentioned climate, but clearly that is one of the most powerful, potentially existential things that will happen to us, is happening to us. But technology is another one. And now, sadly, geopolitics and political polarization has become another huge topic for all of us. So maybe I should pause there. If you want me to sort of, you know, go into the book a little bit more, I can do that, but I wanted to give you sort of that background.
Yeah, thanks so much. Great background. I can see we've got one question from Kerry here. How does a director or advisor distinguish between what will be a mega trend versus a fad? And particularly, what are the characteristics of what will stick? I think that's a very good point. Is that it's all very well seeing these things, but is it just a fad? Very good question.
Yeah, thank you, Kerry. Thank you so much for that question. I think, you know, when in parallel to some of the other things I just mentioned, I've been writing an annual megatrends overview, and it focuses on 5 categories of megatrend. And I've started that as an annual report with Diplomatic Courier, and now this last year, it's just finished publishing in July. I'm publishing it as a series of articles that are freely available on the Illuminem platform, Illuminem, ILLUNIMEN. They're a European-based sustainability platform. And they have great articles, and they summarize a lot of the things that are going on in mostly in sustainability. But so I have 7 articles that I've published there. One introductory.
Sorry, and Andrea, I can't find it.
Illuminem. Let me write it down. Illuminem, and you can Google that. There you go.
Okay, great. And
Sorry
then I'll
about
share
that.
it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And so introduction, conclusion, and then 5 megatrends. And I've always been consistent about the megatrends that I look at. I consider them to be multi-year, large-scale, global phenomena, but we have to understand them as they intersect with our footprint, whether we are people, you know, global citizens, professionals, organizations, companies, NGOs. All of us are affected by technology. That's one category, sort of the exponential technology. I call it this year exponential technology unfettered. And it reflects the fact that from a regulatory standpoint, the EU has been doing a lot. The US has just decided not to do anything for regulation of AI. We have, you know, China doing its own thing, of course. And then you have many different parts of the world developing some AI regulations or guardrails or whatever, but you have a lot of bad actors too who are going to be deploying or have deployed, certainly for cybersecurity issues, have deployed these technologies. So we have a sort of exponential technology unfettered is one of my mega trends. So it's a very big picture thing, but then I give some sort of sub trends in there. So again, fads, things are fads, things come and go. I think if you take a look, for example, at the 4 things that I have underneath exponential technology unfettered, they're concrete examples of what I think is going on. And again, you could add things, you could subtract things, you can agree, you can disagree, but I think we need to talk about these things as part of our awareness. And boards frequently don't spend enough time looking at the context. They're a little bit too focused on, profitability and
Management's reports.
yeah. And again, people have limited time and there's a ton of information out there. So it has to be, they have to be careful and judicious about how they spend their time. But I think at this point, not understanding some of these big ongoing turbulence and opportunity, by the way, and everything I write about, as much as I think that we're reaching a very sort of dangerous period in world history, there's a ton of opportunity in all of this and all this chaos that we're seeing and some of the different developments. I mean, again, depending on where you live, what if you're working for a company, what the supply chain looks like, where your customers are, what kinds of regulations are you subject to, what products and services are everything has to be customized. But at the end of the day, not being aware of some of these contextual trends and megatrends is very dangerous. And I think, smart people need to get together and think about how does that affect our business planning, our business strategy, our governance, who's on our board. I always, I'm sure you do this too, Carolyn, who's on our board and do they have the skill set, the vision?
And they deal with it. Yeah.
Yeah. Do they have the curiosity and humility to say, I don't really know about this, I need to learn? To me, this is one of the most important things ever.
And then how do they learn? Because many of the educational institutions don't have guidance on this. It's new for everyone. So it's really quite important. And that really leads into this, you mentioned right in the beginning, this Pandora era. Now we know about Pandora box, but could you explain the metaphor and how its meaning in this, as you're talking about mega trends, geopolitics, technology, organizational risks? Why should we really leaders take cognizance of it now? Why is it so important now?
Yeah. So when I wrote that first article that led to the invitation to write the book, I think it was called something like Governing Exponential Technologies, Dealing with the Pandora's Box of New Tech, or something like that.
It came from there.
So it came from the article, and then I went ahead and I wrote, and I did use the Pandora's, but I did a little research on the mythology to understand if I was using it correctly. And I did discover in my reading that Pandora, who was a goddess, she got married to one of the gods, and then she went to the I may have this a little bit wrong, but she opened this box, which was her box, Pandora's box, that unleashed the Furies, as they said, but it also unleashed hope. And this is the thing that I didn't know about Pandora's box, was that it wasn't just bad things that got unleashed into the world. There was also some good things. And so I try to use that as my through line a little bit, because it is overwhelming. We're all overwhelmed. There's no doubt about it. Everybody's overwhelmed by what's going on in your own life, your community, your country, internationally, in terms of the subject matter of what you're dealing with, because it's changing so dramatically with all these new technologies, especially generative AI. And so, I wanted to use that as we're at this moment now where things are exploding in terms of opportunity, risk, good, bad, and ugly, all these things in technology, but also socioecology, the climate, that is, and it's been brewing for a long time when it comes to climate issues, clearly. And we're trying to deal with it as humans on Earth, but we're not doing a great job. And now it's going to get worse because there's less international cooperation. So there's the socioecology, there's the technology, there's the geopolitics. It's the sort of change that we haven't seen in probably 30 years, maybe even 50 or 60 years, in terms of alliances, in terms of counting on your neighbor or your ally, all these things that are being disrupted very dangerously, I would say. And then, of course, we have new wars and new situations that are very, very dramatic and dangerous. And we also have the rise of authoritarianism around the world, including some countries I'm familiar with. So the problem here is we can count less on the old things like alliances and rule of law and rights than we used to, at least in some countries. Not everybody on this webinar is probably in the freest country in the world, but neither am I. And so, these are the things that are happening that are affecting. So Pandora, when I started writing the book, I was thinking about technology, and the book is mostly focused on technology, but always in the context of other things that are happening. Now I think it's actually applicable to a variety of things. Governing Pandora means leading in the age of generative AI and exponential technologies is the subtitle, but it's in the context of some of this other dramatic change. And I'll mention one more thing that I think is really important, especially for your audience, Carolyn, and that is one of my megatrends is about leadership trust. And leadership trust, as we know, has been declining all over the world for the last decade or two. There are a number of different surveys and studies that are being done. And to me, that's, again, a piece of the puzzle that really explains some of the stakeholder distrust, some of the inability to be transparent that some leaders have, and inability to engage with stakeholders, understand them, and so on and so forth. So it's all part and parcel of this larger period of incredible change that we're living through.
Incredible. And just to mention that, you're such an authority on all of those, the governing in a multipolar world is the webinar that we're hosting with the GCC Board Directors Institute at the end of the month on the 29th. I'll pop the link in there, but we've asked you to be a panelist there because you're such an authoritative voice in this complex world that we live in, and leaders trying to navigate that. So you wrote the book. Is this a book that, we could recommend to our leaders? So as a company secretary, or as a CEO, would I say, look, I want every one of my board members to read this so that you can understand the world that I'm having to deal with, on the ground. What is the structure of the book, and does it lend itself to that?
Well, of course, I'm going to say yes. So thank you for that softball, but I like to be honest and transparent. So that's who I wrote the book for. I write these books for everyone who's interested, but at the end of the day, I'm most worried about leaders and board members who are not properly informed and properly broad in their thinking. Frequently, they'll be focused on their very important but very limited world. And they won't understand sometimes, not all board members, obviously, but many board members and leaders are so in this tunnel of what their world requires of them in the moment that they're not thinking about the bigger issues that will affect for good and for bad. And I mean, not just risk, certainly opportunity and new value creation. The trends and megatrends that will help them get there. And the book, so I'll tell you a little bit about the structure of the book because it shows you the method to the madness. And I think, I always try to be very clear. And if you go to the website that Georgetown University Press already put up, there's a whole bunch of endorsements there, and you can see who are their board members, people from different parts of the world. There are CEOs, there's people who would be the kinds of people you just asked about, Carolyn. Would they be interested? I think so. And I think hopefully, regardless of how successful the book is, I think it's a good book for people to sort of help navigate. So what I do in the book is I divide the topic into 4 parts. The hardest part for me was learning enough about large scale new technologies to say something that wasn't stupid, because again, I'm not an engineer or a mathematician, so I can't always give you the best sort of technical explanations. But I spent a lot of time, and this is where the blood, sweat, and tears part of writing the book was really going deep into what are exponential technology. So the first part of the book, I call it Preparing for the Age of Pandora, Understanding the Global Tech Megascape. And there is where I talk about these mega trends. So we've talked a bit about that so far. And I also underscore the idea of how these new technologies, especially generative AI, how these technologies are turbocharging other technologies. So what is exponential technology? And I have 5 categories of technology that I explore in the second part of the book, and I call it Triangulating the Age of Pandora, an exponential tech whirlwind tour. So I have 5 buckets of, and that took me a long time to get to the place where, and I had
It came together.
it came together. Yeah. So that was the most painful part of writing the book, because I was learning new things that weren't easily accessible to me. So of course, one of the chapters, the first one, is on generative AI and everything that's going on around that, and trying to break it down into, bite-size understanding.
From a leadership perspective.
From a leadership. So everything I write about in the tech chapters is really you as a board member, you as an executive, you as a policymaker. What do you need to know about generative AI, and how should you break it down? And there's a similar approach in each chapter in the 5 technology chapters. The second one is all about biotechnology. So again, biotechnology, synthetic biology, CRISPR, there's a whole bunch of different things. And again, how can they be used for good and for not so good, right?
Then I just want to ask you about that.
Sure.
In future, we can possibly expect bioengineered staff members to join the workforce, potential staff members. Do you speak about that at all? And you do?
I do. In fact, you jumped into another topic, but all of these things are interconnected. And by the way, there are 5 attributes of exponential technology that I talk about at the very beginning of the book that came to me after doing all this research. And one of them is interconnectedness. So the interconnectedness of various technologies. So you just gave me an example of bioengineered workers. Well, we already have robotics, of course, in the workplace, right? And we have humanoids being created, and much more human-like robots. And of course, we have all this biology that's being developed, the neural implants, you name it. There's a whole bunch of different things coming together. And so, yeah, there could be, there could be humanoids that look very much like humans, that have thinking processes implanted through, neuro implants, which are being implanted into people already. And so you could have that convergence of robotics and biology, if you don't already, in many cases. So
your workforce. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we're just scratching at the surface.
Sorry, and I interrupted. That was only the second part.
That was the second one. So then the third one is what I don't call it this, but I call the chapter Materials Science from Silicon to Tiny Skyscrapers. And what this talks about is this amazing explosion of NVIDIA is leading the way on this, but in terms of the GPUs, the MPUs, all the things that are being developed that power our generative AI and other kinds of technologies. And so I go into materials science, which is all about the semiconductor.
Beyond silicon.
Beyond silicon, exactly. The 4th chapter, I call it Frontier Computing, from Cloud and Edge to Quantum and Metaverse. So there's a whole bunch of different computing, edge and quantum and beyond computing technologies that are being developed that can obliterate the ones that we have today, quantum being certainly the most talked about. And that was a real challenge for me to understand quantum, and don't expect me to explain it on this webinar. So
Herding his cat.
Exactly.
So, before you carry on, I must say, one of my first questions, as Andrea was talking to me before the webinar now, the first thing I said, well, how can I get hold of the book? You can actually pre-order it. So I'm going to pop there, the link is there, and with the Georgetown link. So you can pre-order it. but you're going to be biting your fingernails until February, I'm afraid. So sorry,
It
I
might come
didn't
a
want
little,
to interrupt.
yeah, it might come a little sooner, but the official date is February 1, I think, 2026. But thank you again, Carolyn. And I promise I didn't pay Carolyn anything to make these.
I'm sure everybody on the call is going to be contacting me to get an autographed copy, though.
Oh, well, that'll be complicated depending on where we are. But thank you, thank you. I really appreciate that. So I told you about generative AI, biotechnology, material science, frontier computing, and my last chapter in the technology part is autonomy from killer robots to smart cities, is the name of the chapter. And that kind of addresses some of the things that are going on with robotics, with autonomy. And of course, if we just look at sadly, some of the war theaters that are taking place around the world right now in the Middle East, in Russia, Ukraine, we're seeing the convergence of autonomous drone technology,
Yes.
cyber, AI, AI-driven decision making that's being done autonomously to a certain extent, all kinds of gadgets that are able to perpetrate, military or police kinds of activity. We ain't seen nothing yet, sadly, and they're seeing it in some of these, like in Ukraine and Russia and parts of the Middle East. They're seeing the direct impact of this. I sadly think that this could be used by criminal gangs and for national security reasons, by enemy nations in other countries, just for the heck of it. So anyway.
And you can 3D print anything these days.
Well, exactly. Yeah.
And just to give an example of what you're saying is, so I'm not going to mention any sides or anything, but a truck driver was driving along, and unbeknown, he had a big container on the back of his truck, and he was going from point A to point B, and unbeknownst to him, as he was driving along, the truck, some trigger went off, and the top opened up, and all of these drones flew out, and they went and obliterated a strategic site.
Wow.
Truck driver knew nothing about it, carried on driving, didn't know what was he was just employed to be a truck driver, and here he was weaponized. So this is the kind of dirty tactics that is actually starting to happen. So, and drone warfare is really, because these are kamikaze drones. You can 3D print anything, so they just go in and they kamikaze it.
And to add another possibility to that particular scenario, there was probably a server farm run by some semi-innocent person. There was a woman who was just arrested and convicted in, I believe it was in Nevada, for running a server farm that allowed North Korean IT kinds of people to pretend to be either Western or American or, what have you, and get jobs online with major corporations in the United States. And
I
she
saw that in the press.
Yeah. There were like 50 computers in her house, and she knew she wasn't doing the right thing, but she didn't know that it was North Korea using her computers to get into, Fortune 500 companies. So yeah, and that truck driver, the drones, there's probably something like that in the background too, where people's computers are being hijacked for purposes of.
Well, there was a very well-recognized African university that installed a very, very powerful computer, but then didn't have the skills to effectively secure that computer. And that was also being used by bad actors with its tremendous computing power. So yes, if you don't have the skills to deploy the technology, and you do deploy the technology, you're going to run these risks. And then who's at fault? Actually,
Right.
it's you that deployed the technology, like you said, that lady in Nevada.
Yeah, and let's draw some important lessons from this period of cyber insecurity that we've all lived through for 10 to 15 years now. And boards were kind of slow at getting up to speed about what is the governance side of this. What do we need to do to make sure that our company has all the resources, people, processes needed to create cybersecurity around the most important crown jewels of the company, you know, whether it's IP or people or processes, to make sure that the cybersecurity is proper to the footprint of the business. Well, let's use those lessons learned, which haven't been completely learned, and clearly cyber insecurity is out of control anyway. But let's learn some of those lessons and apply it now to some of the things that we're seeing with generative AI, biotechnology, you know, these other kinds of AI turbocharged cyber attacks which are taking place. So there's just, unfortunately, there's too much for us to worry about. So we have to sort of reduce it to the priorities, but we have to get priorities if nothing else. And we have to always keep in mind that stakeholders have to be protected, including shareholders, clearly, but other stakeholders like employees and customers. And again, you know, whoever is part of your ecosystem of stakeholders. And so boards that aren't doing that are not being responsible.
Yeah, I've actually got a question on that, but I know I've interrupted you again on your book
Okay,
structure.
I'll finish the structure of
Finish
the
the
book.
structure.
Okay, so I start with context, then part two is these 5 technologies, and then part 3 is sort of the heart of the matter. It's what I call the exponential governance mindset. And I have 5 elements of the exponential governance mindset, which kind of talks a little bit to what I just said about let's learn lessons from cyber insecurity. And really, I try to be very intuitive and very direct and clear about what I'm talking about. And these 5 elements start with leadership. They start with creating a 360 tech governance in your organization, talking about how does the board, how does management, how do the frontline IT and other experts work together in a unified way in their organization to deal with the sort of the life cycle of technology. And this is a huge challenge. And I try to make it sound, you know, straightforward, but I've worked in 4 major companies and I've also consulted. And this is always a point of weakness of not having a sort of a holistic 360 governance that applies at every level, you know, the top looking down, the middle doing all the work, and then of course the experts, the frontline IT workers being able to be, you know, equipped properly with the tools and the resources they need. And of course, we know there's a worldwide shortage of cybersecurity experts and workers. So let alone some of these new technologies. So it's a struggle, but we have to sort of get that holistic leadership that looks at technology governance and governance as a holistic 360. So that's the first element. And there's a lot of detail in there.
Just an example of that, I saw the other day, it's with kids. So you send your kid onto the rugby or the football field and they get completely beaten up. And you go, well, why did you get beaten up? Why haven't you got, you know, well, I haven't got a scrum cap and I haven't got a this and I haven't got a this. Well, why haven't you got that stuff? Why don't you tell me? No, Mom, you're supposed to know that I need that stuff. And that's really the leaders. And actually
Yeah.
the leaders need to tell and need to guide and need to, well, you should, have you looked at this? What about, you know, they can always say, no, I don't want a scrum cap. It makes me look funny or whatever it is.
Right, right.
Then they got the choice. But, you know, just to provide that guidance from the leadership side and provide then the resources to be able to use it. And that's exactly what you've said.
I love that. What a
Business
great
going
example.
in and being beaten up.
Yeah, and you know, I have another example from my own experience. I was general counsel of an electric power company that did business all over the world. And one of the places we did a lot of business was Latin America, and we bought up a lot of privatized generation and distribution of electricity. And these assets in several different countries were very dangerous. People were dying, there's high accident rate, and so on and so forth. And our board of directors, this was an American company, mandated that we have safety and security and environmental compliance the same as we had in the US in these new power stations and distribution facilities. And we were incentivized through our bonus structure to bring it up to speed. And boy, did we go out and it was a good thing to do, of course, but we were incentivized by our board of directors to go out and do the right thing. So very similar to the mother, you know,
Yeah.
giving guidance to the child. Again, we don't want to belittle people as children and parents, but the point
No.
is guidance is necessary, governance is necessary. So do you want me to keep going, or do you have
Yes,
something?
please
Yeah.
keep going.
Okay, so that's
If anyone
element
has any
one.
questions, please just pop them in the chat or in the Q&A.
Absolutely. My second, so leadership is the first one. The second one I call ethos. And here I'm talking about embedding responsible tech culture. And this, my background in ethics and compliance and risk management always makes me want to, make sure that there are the right kinds of processes within an organization to allow a robust speak up culture, to allow for people to have venues to bring problems and concerns and issues, not just whistleblow,
Concerns.
concerns, questions. And
We think about whistleblowing. Whistleblowing is big stuff. And oh, I don't want to, whistleblow because I need to have evidence and I need to, but just the ability to raise concern. I'm worried about this. We don't
And
see that a lot.
if you have a good set of processes in place, it won't get to the whistleblower stage because the concern was addressed and didn't fester and become a big risk, right?
Yeah.
And so good ethics and compliance practice in the old-fashioned sort of traditional way is that you have all the sort of bells and whistles of letting people bring their issues to their supervisors, to other experts in the company. If there's a problem on the factory floor, or if there's a concern with an accounting process, whatever it is, that you can raise these issues without fear of retaliation. This is one of the most important things, I think, in any kind of organization. And when that doesn't work, all things break down, and then you have the festering issues that become much bigger, and then you have the whistleblowers because they weren't able to bring yeah. And when the board and the senior executives are not paying attention to how this happens because they're so focused on bringing in the quarterly revenue and the profitability and so on and so forth, they're horses with blinders walking into a potential crisis or scandal at some point because they haven't been. So extrapolating from that sort of model, my ethos chapter, it really talks about how do we embed a responsible tech culture into our organizations. And I talk a lot about some of these interesting examples we've seen in the news, the whole OpenAI saga on governance, which I wrote a few articles about that a few years ago. They've had serious governance issues throughout, and they continue to have a very, so I talk about that. I talk about there's the whole culture, the tech cultures that are warring out there, the accelerationists versus the doomers. And this has become even more sort of amplified in the last half a year or so with the Trump administration giving a seat at the table to a lot of these, what I call the techno-broligarchy.
Oligarchy, I love it.
That's what I call them in the book. I actually lifted that from someone, but it's basically it's the guys in Silicon Valley who are billionaires and who are basically at the forefront of inventing, financing, deploying a lot of these things. And they're all guys. They're mostly white.
Yeah.
And they're billionaires. So, and they are now getting major seats at the table. And that's why we don't have AI regulation federally in our country, in the US, where I live, because the Peter Thiels, the Elon Musks, the Sam Altmans, they all have a seat. Elon maybe is less of a seat at this point, but
Less now.
less now, but a huge influence. And there are some people within the White House that are part of this group of people. David Sachs is a PayPal billionaire who is the AI czar and the crypto czar at the White House right now. And so the influence they're having on American policy, federal policy, is huge. And that counts a little bit for what's going on. So this is part of this cultural picture that we have to understand. And they're the accelerationists, basically the people who want unfettered development of technology, crypto, as well as AI and other things. And they're getting all these big contracts from the Defense Department and other government agencies. So and I'm focusing on the US, but there are other parts of the world where there's this continuing cultural I wouldn't call it a clash, but on the other side of this culture are what I have three groups of people. I have the tech masters of the universe, who are these people. Then I have the tech worker bees, who are the frontline workers. And then I have the tech guardians of the universe, who are,
Ah,
yes, and they are the people who are populating some of the important think tanks, institutes, doing work to think about the guardrails that are needed to think about, the governance. There's a great organization in Silicon Valley called the Center for Humane Technology, and Tristan Harris and Asa Rat, I can't remember his last name altogether, but they were the guys who shone a light on social media's issues back 10 years ago. They were part of this social dilemma documentary that was done, and they
yes,
continue to do work on shining a light on generative AI and some other things that, in terms of how do we create, and they're considered the doomers. They're not the doomers. They're the people who want to create
guardians.
guardrails. Yeah. And so there's
Mm.
that cultural clash going on around the world, but certainly very sort of clearly in the US. And so that's chapter two, ethos. Chapter three, well, not chapter two, it's the second
Yeah,
chapter.
section.
Yeah, the second element. The third element is what I call impact. And this basically, the subtitle of it is integrating stakeholders into the tech loop. And many of you have probably heard about integrating humans into the tech loop. I'm talking about how do we deal with the many stakeholders that any organization, any agency, any NGO company has. How do we integrate their expectations, their needs, their perspectives into what we're producing for them, whether they're
Mm.
actual products or services. And so it's all about that sort of impact lens, sustainability lens on how do we deal with our stakeholders when it comes to for example, making sure that either technology that we're buying, algorithms, software programs, whatever, or that we're developing internally, how do we make sure that the data is clean, that the data is quality? And how do we make sure that we've tested and rep tested and done whatever we have to do to understand the products we're creating? Before we sell them or integrate them into other products, the technology piece. So it's all about that. And I have a number of examples there. So it starts with leadership, it continues with culture, then it goes into how do we deal with stakeholders. The fourth element is what I call resilience. And the subtitle there, it's a mouthful, but I want to say it,
Mm.
deploying poly-risk and poly-crisis preparedness. So don't say that, I won't say
Preparedness.
that too won't say that too fast. But I call it resilience, but then the elements of what I deal with there are that we've all heard the polycrisis term probably. Um,
Mm.
Came out of a couple of decades ago, somebody came up with this idea that there's multiple crises taking place at contiguously or even simultaneously. And so I totally agree with that. And I think we've gotten way more into that period of polycrisis. But then I came up with, while I was writing, and I've done a lot of risk management, but came up with this term, and I have a nice little picture that ChatGPT, DALI helped me draw, of what I call poly-risk. And it's basically multiple risks interconnecting and overlapping and
Mm.
multifaceted. So it just creates this image of complexity, of overlapping complexity. And an example, I mentioned it earlier, is geopolitical risk, Russia, Ukraine, cyber risk, all the different things that happen because of the geopolitical risk, and then automated drone technology deployed on behalf of the parties, right? And so this is a poly risk. It's a very complex set of overlapping risks. And we have to think about our world more in that sense than in, oh, we have a little environmental risk over here and we have and that's why we need smart people thinking about this stuff and doing things to address this stuff. So that's, in essence, a very big chapter that talks about the EU AI Act, other jurisdictions. It talks about a lot of different things to get us to think about this in a coherent way. Resilience building being the ultimate goal, right? You know what your risks are, you know that there are multi-crises, get ready and have the right processes in place to address. And then my last element of the exponential governance mindset is what I call foresight. And that's really about how do we unleash a future forward, future ready business strategy that includes the tech piece. And so it's all about revenues, it's all about profits, but in a sort of a thoughtful way. It's not about, oh, let's invest in this thing because it's a fad, right? The words that we used earlier. Let's do it in a thoughtful way that brings into account the situational awareness, the context, that brings into account the risks, the opportunities, that brings into account thinking about how it impacts our stakeholders. And then how do we create new value creation, new products, new services? There's so much opportunity right now. So there's, a lot of good. I mean, one of the big paradoxes for me of our time is here we are with these really serious climate issues. And one of my mega trends this year, by the way, I call it socio-ecological polyrisk and tipping points rising. And scientists are looking at these climate tipping points, which if we go over some
thresholds,
all hell will break loose for the neighboring populations. So
Andrea, you mentioned right in the beginning, and you're touching on it now, Pandora's box unleashes all of this overwhelmingly negative, but also this hope. So
yes.
And that's the opportunities you're speaking about now, is how can boards actually navigate and just be aware of the negativity and find opportunity. And you were mentioning now in climate, there are opportunities available, and in AI, there are opportunities.
Absolutely. I mean, the technology and climate, this is what I was saying, the paradox. We have this socio-ecological mega risk, and yet there are so many technologies but what's missing, and I just wrote a short piece that'll come out next month when UNGA happens, the UN General Assembly and Climate Week. There's a piece I wrote about how we have this amazing opportunity to address climate issues from a tech standpoint, and we're squandering it because of lack of governance will. I blame some of the nations that are not coming to the table, others that are kind of abandoning carbon, zero carbon. I mean, you know what I'm talking about. I'm going to finish telling you about the book now. So
yes, okay, we've only got 8 minutes, so let's go.
We're going to be fast. So there's 4 parts: the context, the technologies, the exponential governance mindset, and then my last part I call future-proofing the age of Pandora, deploying the exponential governance mindset. And I have 2 chapters there, short and sweet, more or less short and sweet. One of which is about future-proofing ourselves and our organizations. And I have a few ideas there for each of us individually as people. How do we prepare? What are the things we should be doing? What should we focus on? What should board members look like? What are the qualities of the future leader that we need to be able to navigate these times? And I don't mince words about who should be there. And then I have an organizational typology too of how future ready is your organization. And it really depends on 2 major factors. One is how well deployed or capable are you of implementing the exponential governance mindset, 5 elements? How prepared are you really? And then I have the sort of approach that your leadership has to technology. And we've all heard move fast and break things. That's kind of the Zuckerberg mantra, right? And it is the mantra of many tech companies. Move fast and break things means they're going to hurt people.
And environment and lots of things.
Exactly. Or there's a move faster, slow, and build things approach that I talk about, which is more thoughtful and thinking about the guardrails and that sort of thing. Then you have don't move at all. And, I can't remember the exact words I use, but it's basically those that fall asleep and will lose. So they won't be able to move forward. So there's really move fast and break things, move fast or slow and build things. So I have a typology of how future ready you're going to be. So that's chapter 13, which is the penultimate chapter. And my last chapter I call Future.
Couldn't have only 13 chapters, right?
14.
So you can't have only 13.
No, you can't. You can't.
No.
I spent an enormous amount of time before I write. I spend a huge amount of time troubleshooting my outline and the pieces of the puzzle. So I try to make it very sort of intuitive and flowing. And so this last part is really looking at the future and how do we prepare ourselves as people? How do we prepare our organizations? And then this last chapter is called Future Proofing the Global Commons. And then I talk about exponential frontiers, and I give a number of different examples in 4 frontiers that I'm thinking about. One is the biological, technological frontier. The next one is the mechanical, which is the robotics and the things we're creating, the machines. The next one is the planetary, which is how do we deal with the global commons of the oceans, the atmosphere, climate. And then the final frontier is the virtual, which is all the stuff we're doing in the virtual world. So we have
today.
Yeah, exactly. What would we do without Zoom? I mean, we wouldn't know each other. Let's put it that way. Which is lovely that we do. So, so that's the book. That's the overall structure of the book. And thank you for giving me an opportunity to show it.
No, absolutely. Thank you for joining us. I think we really, really need to. You've written so many papers and those are so interesting. So I'm just so grateful that you agreed to participate in this webinar with us. It's fabulous. And I really like the image that you've got on the book. The book it's all black. It's all doom and gloom. And then you've got Pandora's box opening with all the colors, and it's just happy colors and pastel colors.
I have to tell you, when my publisher...
Don't tell me it was ChatGPT that did it. No.
Oh, no. In fact, I want to bring the human back. I mean, that's my big thing. But no, when my publisher, Georgetown University Press, they asked me, what do you like on a cover? And they had a whole, questionnaire. And then I could show them examples of covers that I liked. And then I could explain what I wanted. And wouldn't you know that, a couple of months later, they come back with this book cover. And I'm a very picky person, by the way. I had nothing to say. It was perfect on the first try. And it's a graphic artist, a human being who did it. And my feeling was this totally represented what I'm trying to do. As you said, a black cover, it's almost like the world in the universe, right? It's a big black universe, but there's hope, there's things we can do. We need to persevere. We need to be resilient. We need to be prepared. It's all the stuff that I'm trying to say to people through the book. And thank you for the opportunity to talk about this, because this is the first time I've had this conversation about the book.
The sneak preview.
Super sneaky preview.
Yeah, that's right. So thank you, Andrea. I've put the link of the registration site, your registration page. We are going to update it with this recording, with the podcast summary of this recording, with frequently asked questions. We're also going to have a 7-minute overview. But also I'm going to load the Google Notebook language model comes up with a study guide. And the study guide asks, yes, it's amazing. And it gives you leading questions to be asked on the subject. So I will add those in there because I think these are questions that will lead people to go, I need to know more. I need to hear more. I need to read the book. But besides that, I need to hear more from Andrea. So to everyone online, Andrea will be back with us on the 29th of August. Please do register for that webinar. 28. Yep. Sorry, yes, I'm right. I'm wrong. Let me go back to that. 28.
Like 5:30 a.m. my time. So I'm
sorry. So let me just pop that link in there, where we are talking about governance in a multipolar world. And there we've got a panel, and it's really coming out of the GCC countries. So I don't like to, the Middle East is such a colonialist term, but coming out of the North Africa, Asia kind of communities, that this is something of real importance to them. And it is to all of us. So we're really looking forward to welcoming you to that webinar as well, Andrea. Thank you so much for your time with us today. Thank you everyone for joining us online, and we're looking forward to seeing you next time. Thanks, Andrea. Thanks,
Thank you so
everyone.
much.
Okay,
Take care, everyone.
bye.